All right, guys, welcome back to Conspirinormal. And I'm flying solo tonight, but we have one of our favorite guests on the show that we actually haven't had on in, it's been a couple of years. So how time flies, but that's Mr. Walter Bosley, who's, I couldn't even count how many times you've been on, Walter, but you've been on a lot on this show. So I want to thank you for that, especially.
And ever since, 2020 and 2021, there have been these weird gaps, right? That, a lot of folks are still trying to catch up just because things got weird, trying to schedule things and stuff. So it's great to be back. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad to have you. We're gonna talk about your latest book, NYMZA, How America Sold Its Soul.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of a shorter book than normal. It's only like 150 pages basically.
Yeah, shorter
But
and the most depressing thing that I've ever written to go through the experience of writing it. Yeah.
oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I guess we could talk about I guess we could talk about that. So, how was it depressing to write this book?
I first approached this subject, I think, in 2017. I think around there, 2017, 2018. And I put it aside because I was realizing that if the hypothesis is correct, that, both of our entire lives have been, in this post World War II era of, we're basically subject to how do you put it, living in a post coup America. And I had heard that kind of talk before, particularly regarding Joseph Farrell's Nazi International and the international bankers and all that, but it didn't really sink in until I read a book which was one of the main sources for NYMZA, and that was this book, NYMZA, How America Sold Its Soul. That source was the 1937 book, The Thousand Year Conspiracy by Paul Winkler, which was published in 1943. Okay. So it was published before the war was finished,
Right.
before Operation Paperclip happened.
Right.
And yet what I saw in that book, what he was describing in the history of Germany, starting in the medieval era and on forward, was an exact description of what has happened in the United States since the end of World War II. And it just kind of fell into place for me then, like, oh my God, they have turned around and done the same exact thing that Winkler wrote about. Remember, he wrote it in 1937. Okay. That the Germans have done. They befriend, they ingratiate with a supposed ally, and then they kind of take over from within. And then they turn on the host, like a deadly parasite, and make a new friend of that host enemy, and then we'll turn around and do the same thing to that host enemy. When you get into the details, the description of in Winkler's book, you realize, my gosh, even right down to the JFK assassination, this is exactly from their playbook, specifically the Prussian Junkers playbook. Dating back long before, as I said, long before the unification of what we call modern Germany in the 19th century.
Yeah. We're going to definitely get to that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So reading that book, because it was kind of like an awakening, like, oh my God, this is, even my career, I had served 20 years for what really is this military industrial complex empire. It made me put it aside. I had to put it aside because it was, for me, kind of like a stark realization. So a few years pass, and I realized finally, year before last, I've got to address this material, and
Sure.
so I finally decided to jump into it. But it was very tough for me to write, to go back to what started this discussion. It was tough for me to write because I still felt the same way about what this material was revealing about the U.S., our own country and our post World War II history. So it was a bit of a slog for me to get through, as short as it is.
Right. Right. It's very, yeah, there's a lot of history in this book for as short as it is too. And
Mm-hmm.
you go into a surprising amount of detail for the length of the book as well. I suppose we should say that if we're talking about Germans, I guess we're not really talking about the entire nation of Germany. We're talking about a few people that has some high influence, I suppose you would say.
Right. Yeah, we're talking. Sorry, I wanted to have my copy of the book
Sure.
handy here. Yeah, to be very specific, on that, we are talking about the reason I call it NYMZA, How America
Yeah.
Sold Its Soul. Those of you familiar with my previous works, Origin, about the breakaway civilizations, and other research I've done, you'll know that I dug into Charles Delshau's mysterious NYMZA, which he tells us about in telling us about the Sonora Aero Club, right? The airship, pre-airship mystery days, the 1850s. And by his description, I dug into it and I found where very likely this NYMZA organization he's talking about could have been right there involved with Germany's and in pre-unification Germany's industrial complex, and of course their own military industrial complex, as it were. So I have come to see NYMZA. Okay, I've come to propose NYMZA as the political agenda movement, or the political action committee, if I can, a pack. It was their pack, so to speak, backed up by industrial resources and others, and that they were the real driving force behind the unification of Germany to begin with, and they continued on as the driving force that created the atmosphere for the Nazi Party to emerge and rise into power. So, yes, by the time we get to the end of World War II, I think most people realize that, certainly the Allies defeated the German nation, right? But a
Yeah.
lot of us see where we did not completely stop the Nazi Party.
Right.
And I'm not the first guy to point out that a whole bunch of Nazis came into the United States, welcomed with open arms through Operation Paperclip, to be part of our military industrial complex, such as it was then. And then they, of course, put it on steroids, as they say, and really developed it into this American imperial thing. So, yeah, we are specifically talking about not just post World War II surviving Nazi apparatchiks, to borrow a Soviet term. We're talking about the social, political, and industrial force and forces that were behind the Nazis' power to begin with. We're talking about a group that has done what I think they did with Operation Paperclip to the United States. They've done this since medieval times, okay, in their own history, and then throughout the history of Europe and so forth. So really, I know a lot of people get exasperated when they hear Joseph Farrell or myself, rather, oh, the Nazis again. You get, and in all fairness, we need to start putting a finer point on who we're talking about, and that's what I tried to do with this book.
Sure.
I try to say, okay, look, I'm talking about the driving force behind the Nazis. The Nazis are a thing that, you know, we're moving away from the Nazis as such with time and history, but the basic principles are really, I think, original property of NYMZA.
I want to back up just a little bit, Walter,
Uh-huh.
if we can, just about what NYMZA actually stands for, because it is an acronym. And we've talked about this before, but there might be some people that are new to this show or new to your work that may not
Yeah.
know when we talk about NYMZA, who we're actually talking about. And we're going to get deeper into the woods on this, but I just want to kind of like talk a little bit about the basics.
Now, remember, the idea that it's an acronym is hypothetical. Okay. And that's because Delschow, who is admittedly, our one sole source
Right.
on NYMZA, he always spelled it with capital letters, right? Even with the rest of the words in any given sentence being uppercase, lowercase. So, based upon that, I and others have proposed that, okay, this must have been an acronym. And if it was an acronym, what could it possibly have stood for? So, again, I did a hypothetical analysis of this within the context of Delschow putting NYMZA within a context of this Sonora Aero Club, this airship technology mystery. Okay, so the perspective I took on NYMZA was from that angle, that it would have had something to do with developing airship technology, flight technology. So I came up with a few books back, actually in Empire of the Wheel 2.
Right.
I came up with this acronym, and I even had, because I catch hell for this from, the Dunning-Kruger crowd. I have put it past native German speakers, and they have told me that my proposed, possible interpretation of it is accurate. It's fine. You do have some nitpickers, but basically, what I propose now, remember, folks, I've always said this is hypothetical. Okay. And what I have proposed that NYMZA meant in German, and forgive my slaughtered pronunciation, but NYMZA, NYMZA, the Nationalistisch Jagdflugzeug Maschinensammlungsamt. And what that would mean in English, which I thought I had that right here, but essentially it would have been the Nationalist Airship Development Office, Airship Technology Development Office, and specifically of a military perspective. And this would have, again, I propose this would have required the involvement and the resources in the brain trust of your top industrialists of, German industrialists of its day, whoever stood this thing up. Now, remember, it's nationalist, so it was not an official German government entity. It was it was very much a political agenda group, because that's what nationalist means as opposed to national. So this would have been a private group that would have been involved with their goal, their objective, material objective was to develop advanced technology. Now you hear other people talking about the X-Tech. Our friend Daniel List, Dark Journalist, has done a fantastic multi-year series on X-Tech and X-Protect, and this is just that age-old pursuit of advanced exotic technologies, and that's what I argue NYMZA was about materially, but they were also about a corporate socio-political perspective and agenda. And by the time we get to the 20th century, I argue that they had their talons deep enough into the German government and German society that they, as I said before, easily paved the way and made it easy for the Nazi Party to rise. to power, and because they would have been that force behind that rise. So it started out as really an industrial complex, a private organization, that founded what became the German industrial complex, and then by extension, that's military industrial complex. And they followed their model. They rose up their own nation to a certain point, pushed the envelope, raised the ire of the rest of the world. And when the rest of the world resisted, they realized, we pretty much brought our own country to ruin. We're just going to jump on the back of these other guys that beat us, and we'll live on. We will continue our thing. Basically, NYMZA is a corporation, so to speak. It's a corporate body that, like a lot of big corporations in America, for example, care more about its own longevity and its own existence than their very own country. And so that's a way to describe NYMZA today.
Right. It's not the New York Motor Zephyr Association, as it's said in.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Del Shao himself stated that NYMZA was based in Germany. He says it himself in his own writings, in his own diary. It was never a New York-based organization. That was a nice try, but that attempt was in the days before I think anybody really did a deep dive on Del Shao's work.
Yeah. And we can trace NYMZA, and you trace it back pretty far into the medieval world.
I try
really even past the medieval world into the ancient world. If you're talking about, you talk about the Scythians and the Teutonic Knights and the Junkers. Yeah. This is where this really starts. You have this tradition that kind of starts with the Teutonic Knights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You had this group. You could argue that their very origins could be murky, because what we know as the Prussians are not really the Prussians.
Right.
They were what was called the Beteljunkers, essentially your middle class merchant class, right? And they had aspirations of higher, greater power, greater stature in their society. Well, they got themselves ingratiated with the Teutonic Knights. Now, I talk about why would they target them? Well, the Teutonic Order was very powerful, right? It was pretty much the law enforcement of the land, right? These were medieval times, the feudal era, okay? There were the elite, there were the serfs, and this whole middle class Beteljunkers kind of thing was a relatively new thing in Europe still. And so they were maneuvering to ingratiate themselves with the Teutonic Order, okay, so that they could use the order's power to enforce certain circumstances that would benefit the Beteljunker class, okay? And one of the first ways they used to target, basically the Teutonic Knights became their thugs, okay, their enforcers. And one of the first things they did was to target the territory known as Prussia, okay, and to take that over. And then what they did was they grafted their values, their projected, their identity onto that territory, so that they and their way of looking at things became what people thought of as Prussia and the Prussians. Okay. The original peoples who lived in what was called Prussia were not like that. They were not like the stern, militaristic, very cold, controlling narcissists that we think of, Prussians today, even when we look historically. So they did this thing. And remember, this was kind of their own ostensibly this was their own people, right? This was pre-unification Germany, so they were doing this to the other city states and territories and stuff. So their origins, though, might reach back into the Scythians of the Russian steppes and the Black Sea, which could also have a connection to the mystic bankers of Chaldea, right, of old Babylon, that kind of thing. Joseph Farrell really lays that out in Babylon's Banksters, his book Babylon's Banksters, and the Financial Vipers of Venice. Now, one of the other reasons why they chose these Junkers, however you pronounce it, you can do both. It is suspected, when we look back, it is suspected that the Teutonic Knights may have been among the beneficiaries of the Fourth Crusade. Okay, the technological secrets and treasures and ancient secrets, maps and what have you, that were captured in Constantinople during that Fourth Crusade. Okay. Right. It is believed the Templars also were beneficiaries of that. Yes. So
there was a massive looting of Constantinople. Yeah.
Right. And what did Constantinople have? Constantinople had their own version of the Library of Alexandria, which historians will tell you, when you really look into it, had a lot of the same books and same things that the Library of Alexandria had. So, think of all that lost technology and knowledge of the new world and things like that. So the Bedeljunker said, hey, these guys are thugs that will, we can manipulate to do our bidding. Talk about being Machiavellian. They were very much that. But also some of them are adept at this ancient lost technology and the knowledge of the new world. Now, it was with, I present in the book, and it's not original with me, but I present it within the context of NYMZA specifically. It was with the Bull of Rimini, which was an edict put out by the I forget which pope it was. Anyway,
it was Innocent the Third, I think.
Innocent, yeah, Pope Innocent. Yeah. And basically what that did was that gave the Teutonic Knights a license to conquer. And here's the thing. Winkler points this out in his book, but that never ended. That was never rescinded. It's like it's still out there, and they, in the intervening centuries, have just functioned on the Bull of Rimini. The Pope said that we could conquer territories, and we will continue to do that, no matter what allegedly supersedes it and all this other stuff. It could be argued that that's what they're going on, is this Bull of Rimini. Now, why would the Pope issue that and word it the way he did? Well, this was after the Fourth Crusade, right? This was during that time when it's pretty much suspected now that certain powers, certain offices or whatever in Europe were aware of the New World. Okay, they were aware of the existence of the Americas before Columbus, right? Before Spain pulled off their opening up.
Sure, I can absolutely buy that.
Yeah, so it was definitely something that certain players would have known about and wanted to get their hands on. So this Bull of Rimini is key in even, I argue that it was the justification they used for using Operation Paperclip as a Trojan horse to take over the United States. Okay, I argue that they just see us as another one of those places that the Bull of Rimini says they have a right to conquer. This is murky when you go back to before the Fourth Crusade, when you go back to, before medieval Europe. because you're getting into the Scythians and the Chaldeans and such. But once you get to medieval Germany, you can name names and it's more clear and it's a little bit better documented. So it looks like a very old game, right? That's just been played through the ages. And this particular brand of it, under what I'm using NYMZA for, Dale Shell's NYMZA for. They're continuing to play it to this day.
Okay, so what happens to the Teutonic Knights themselves?
They, as I said, are essentially, they're eaten alive from within because of the Betelgeuse class. First, becoming servants, like, oh, let us be your blacksmiths and let us be your suppliers. Because you see, a man who's a knight is a war machine in himself. Okay. It's not just a guy putting on the armor, grabbing up the broadsword or the hammer, the big war hammer, and riding out with his other buddy knights. That was an expensive venture. That's why wealthy men were the knights, because they could afford all the support personnel just to have, their stable, right, of mounts, of horses. Okay. That required more than one person to feed those horses and all this, that, and the other. They had to have their armor. They had a personal armorer in most cases. They had, squires and such, people that would, a retinue that would go with them on the battlefield to help, bring out the weapons, organize them. A knight was a war machine in himself, and so therefore had a retinue. And these Betelgeuse, they ingratiated themselves with the knights to provide those functions. And then through the years, because they were loyal servants, they would become trusted and they would become friendly. And eventually they started marrying into the knights' families and descendants and stuff, to where they were just really became literally family. And then the Junkers became wealthier because of the service they were giving the knights, and then they would have side businesses or other clients, and you get you understand how an industry grows. And so it was really an early model, early European model of what a military industrial complex is, right? So once they had ingratiated themselves, and the Betelgeuse had brought themselves up to almost a level social stature, certainly as wealthy as a lot of the knights, then they had more power, and they started exhibiting their political influence. Okay. And they started undermining the knights, the order. Okay. And ultimately, boy, off the top of my head, I don't remember the name of the battle, but there was that one battle in which it is believed that the Betelgeuse had gotten to some of the soldiers, and one soldier rolled up the banner in a way that is done when retreat is called. And this soldier did this at a particularly crucial point in this battle between the Teutonic Knights and an invading force or an enemy. And so their army thought that it was time to retreat when no retreat had been called. So they kind of turned and to go away, to come off the battlefield. And that allowed the enemy to just really turn up the power and come at them. And I believe when they went into it, the Knights had 10 times the number of soldiers and force than they had when the battle was over. I mean, it was a slaughter. Grunwald or something.
I think,
like that.
You're right. That's the battle.
Yeah, and that was truly what brought down the Teutonic Order ultimately for good. And it was all on the duplicity of this mysterious group called the Society of Lizards, which remains mysterious to this day. In my research, I see where the Society of Lizards was probably linked to that old murky source of this Betelgeunker's NYMZA culture. Okay, so whoever they really were, they played their role in finally destroying the Teutonic Order, and then a new political system replaced the Order's power and such, and their next objective was unification, right?
Yeah.
Of all the city states.
And we should say too that how this leads directly into the unification of Germany is that the Teutonic Knights only own what is now, well, Prussia was now like the Kaliningrad Oblast, right? Which is part of that kind of exclave of Russia now, but that used to be East Prussia.
Yeah.
And so the Grand Master, the Hohenzollern, he becomes secular because of the Reformation.
Yeah.
And the Hohenzollerns also rule in Brandenburg. Eventually it falls to one branch of the family, and that becomes the Kingdom of Prussia. And that about 300 years later, that's when you have the unification of Germany. So that it leads directly to it.
And Brandenburg, I believe, is where Delschau said NYMZA was headquartered.
Right.
Specifically Brandenburg.
Right. Which Prussia no longer exists, I mean, as an entity, a political entity, but there is still a state of Brandenburg in Germany.
And there remains that that Prussian subculture, which, as we know, by the time we get to the 20th century, that's, all those heel clicking, ramrod straight, wearing the eye patch, evil Nazi types. That they are the product of that Prussian subculture.
Because Germany is unified by Prussia, and it becomes Prussia is this militarized state, and it becomes Germany. Therefore, becomes a militarized state.
And they use the technology, remember, to push unification. They use specifically the railroad, if you recall. They said, hey, we can unify all the states, but let's build this railroad. And then they, use that as a jumping board to argue, why don't we just unify? We're all connected now.
Well, one thing we should talk about is, we're still kind of staying in the Middle Ages, but this is important, is this group called the Vim, or the
Feme, or the Feme. The FEHME.
Yeah. Yes. This is another one. This is another part of this that you talk about, and I guess that is a part of NYMZA or associated with it somehow.
Yeah, it and it has very dark implications for our own history, as you know, because you read the book. As I say in the book, the theme was a throwback to the feudal era. The Westphalian practice of manorial rights, lords over serfs, was its basis. From this emerged the secret death tribunal, a pagan entity and concept which masqueraded as a holy Christian body. This religious facade, also used by the Teutonic Order to great effect, was a means by which the Femme and the Order could resist the old Roman law. Here's the thing. They were elitists, right? I mean, what I just read there, they were very much elitists. And the secret death tribunals, they would decide who had to die based on, were they inconvenient for the regime, right? The desired regime. So this group, they would have their little secret tribunals. They would decide, which leader, whoever the person was, had to die. And they would carry it out in a public and violent manner. Okay. And nobody would question them. There were authorities and leaders, burgomeisters and other governors and such, that they were powerful guys, tough guys, otherwise. But when it came to this mysterious group that would do these very public assassinations and executions, they would just feign ignorance. And they basically would say it doesn't pay to speak out about them. And um, that very much resonated with what we now see surrounding the JFK assassination.
Yeah, because this is an idea that they carry out these things. There's a ruling, a secret ruling
Yeah.
somewhere, and it's carried out by these
Right.
willing or unwilling executioners.
And this was their enforcement arm, okay?
Right.
That they would use in the feudal, in the medieval era and the post-medieval era. And so when I looked at the history of the U.S. after World War II, it's like, well, let's see. We have Operation Paperclip, which, by the way, people think Operation Paperclip was all about the bomb, and it was not. It was primarily all about and mostly about aerospace technology, putting
Right.
man in space,
Right.
believe it or not.
Right.
And it was the idea of the German scientists themselves. This was not the brainchild of the American officers who ran the thing. This was proposed to Colonel Harry Armstrong, for example, by a German counterpart. Colonel Harry Armstrong was a aerospace medicine specialist. And I never realized when I was younger the importance of aerospace medicine, but aerospace medicine has everything to do and always had to do with putting humans into space, right? And so Operation Paperclip was all about getting aerospace specialists. And it was proposed to us, the Americans specifically, U.S. Army, by Germans, by the Germans themselves. And they said, we can get a whole bunch of us to come over to your side and such. So to me, that fit the definition of the Trojan horse. For those of you not familiar with Homer's Iliad, the Trojan War, the Greeks, so to speak, they build the giant wooden horse, right, to show respect to the Trojans who have defeated them. And what they've really done is they've hidden a force of men inside the Trojan horse. The Trojans accept it as a gift, right? Bring it into their city through the gates. And what happens while they're partying it up, having a good time? The enemy soldiers inside the horse get out of the horse, open the gates for their own army to come in and invade, and Troy falls, right? That's the classic story of the Trojan horse. And I see Operation Paperclip as Nazi Germany backed by NYMZA's NYMZA, really, their Trojan horse to get into the United States. And they did. And this FEHME, the FEME, they were still in existence, in my opinion. And when it came time, when JFK resisted their elitism and the military industrial complex and all the things that President Eisenhower warned about, the secret tribunal decided that JFK had to go. So, of course, they do it in classic FEME fashion. They do it violently and publicly. And, of course, initially, all the authorities are afraid to question it or even acknowledge it because we end up with the Warren report, right? Magic bullet, single shooter, and on and so forth. So the JFK assassination, I agree with those who before me have proposed that was the big overt coup moment. Okay. And from there, everybody knows that our military industrial complex was then given free rein by Lyndon Johnson to expand and, just kind of go forth in an imperial fashion. And what I do in the book is point out how from that point forward, they have continued to gain more and more power politically and, to the point where they control our congressmen and the direction of American foreign policy.
Okay. And I definitely want to get to that. But first, let's talk a little bit about why NYMZA is interested in the Americas And you do use the term the Americas, so we're not just
Mhm.
talking about the United States. So there's actually an interest that goes back into the 19th century
Yes.
of why that they're
That
interested in these two continents.
Yeah, well, the big clue, the big foot stomper, is the fact that when Germany unifies, they go under the gold standard. So gold, of course, that age old story, the gold is one thing that they are definitely after. But I also argue that it's the what I like to call the lost technology of the forgotten civilizations, and certainly because of the megalithic structures, which of course exist all over the world, and they of course would have been aware of the ones in Europe. You know, they wanted to get over here for the gold, but also to get their hands on, you know, whatever relics, whatever information, whatever knowledge. Um, you know, I argue in another book, I present in another book how you know, like many others have before me, that the Templars were coming here. I laid out in my 2013, yeah, my 2013 book, Empire of the Wheel, Two Friends from Sonora, that the uh, the Templars likely had vaults over here in North America, and I kind of go into that further, more deeply in Secret Missions One, the hidden legacy of Old California. Um, so certainly the Templar Order was coming over here. Certainly they not only would have been looking for relics, but bringing relics over. And I think that NYMZA and the forces working for them would have been looking for these same things. But gold was very much a primary driving force and objective for them.
Okay, and also too the existence of lost technology,
Yeah, yeah. As
ancient
I was just
technology.
saying, you
Yeah.
know, the whatever the megalithic structures could you know, reveal in the study of them, whatever they could find in the archaeological sites throughout, you know, Mesoamerica and South America, right, and you know, into North America, because we can't forget, you know, the mysteries of North America, Cahokia, you know, coming to mind, and the legend that made the Spanish believe that there indeed was some ancient civilization led by an Amazonian queen in what we call California. Uh, that there might have been something substantial to that idea. So yeah, it was pretty much lost secrets and gold,
And you do
and controlling the, you know, a hemisphere of vast resources, so you know, to
right.
expand their complex, their industrial complex.
And you do speculate that some of that lost knowledge may have influenced some of the later airship technology.
Oh, I
You
think so.
speculate that in other books as well.
Yeah, I think that going back to when you look at the Vedic histories that claim lineage back, in some
Sure,
cases millions of years, at least hundreds of thousands of years.
sure. Hmm.
um, you know, when you look at what is suggested in those old writings and was subsequently kind of fleshed out to the point where we get what we call, for instance, the Mercury vortex engine, that kind of thing. You're getting into anti-gravity or counter-gravity, more likely. Um, yeah, this is the kind of thing that I see and others see as influencing the Sonora Aero Club, whom Delshow talks about and who I've talked about a lot. I made a little discovery that the turbine process system that Delshow um, very specifically charts out and provides schematics for us, that he said the leader of the Sonora Aero Club in the 1850s was using, I found where in 1849, I think it was, a physicist who was one of the fathers of modern study of thermodynamics, Macorne Rankine, Rankine. He had published in 1849 what's called the Rankine turbine, and it is virtually identical to the schematic that Delschow provides, saying that this is what the leader of the Sonora Aero Club installed in these flying machines, these arrows, but it was a fuel of his own design and creation that he ran through, processed through the turbine. And that's what, they used for countergravity and whatever else they could do with this information. And I argue that that this whole idea of the mercury vortex technology, the Rankine turbine, when you combine these things, I think that's what Peter Menace of the Sonora Aero Club was doing to some success in developing counter-gravity flight technology. It possibly reaches back to that lost technology of the forgotten civilization, and that your various secret groups, secret societies, what have you, would have passed whatever knowledge they had down through their membership through the ages, and their members would have gone forth in the world looking for the rest of the pieces to finally put it all together.
You also talk about this in chapter 9 of the book. You talk about Oliver Havaside and his GEM, the gravido electromagnetism theory, which is something that is it's being come up with in the late 19th century. And you connect this to the Nazi Bell experiments that Joseph Farrell has written about.
Yeah. Here's the thing about the Bell. There are reasons to question our modern legend of it. Okay. So if you base your conclusion just on those reasons, which I'll lay out here in a second, you could dismiss the Bell story. The problem is that there is a book from 1908 that was written entirely in Sanskrit and was not translated into any other language, and that being English, until I think the 1950s. And that is the book that people mistakenly refer to as an ancient Vedic text talking about the Mercury vortex engine. Well, it's not itself. It only dates back to 1908. Now, Delschow was still alive in 1908. He died in 1923. Is it possible that he could have read this book and concocted this stuff about the Sonora Aero Club using this technology? Well, only if he spoke and read Sanskrit, because at that time it was an obscure book that had not hit Europe yet. So therefore we can assume it hadn't hit the West. So no, I mean, it doesn't look like Delschow was even aware of this particular book. Now, I'm sorry, I meandered. Remind me of the question.
Oh, about the GEM technology and
the GEM technology.
The Bell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The Bell. We're talking about the
and
Bell.
We should say too that I think that book you're referring to, is that the one that was the channeled text?
Yeah. And I have issue with, and I admit that I have issue with channel text. So going back to, okay, what does this have to do with the Bell? Well, the stuff in that book looks very much like what we're told about the Bell. And as I said, just based on how we learned about the Bell in our modern times and some issues, we could question the whole Bell thing and dismiss it, except Delschow, in one of his drawings, he clearly draws a schematic of a rudimentary proof of concept version of the Bell. Okay. And
Okay.
he does this before he dies. He dies in 1923. So sometime between 1890 and 1923, Delschow has drawn the schematic of the bell. And he claims that this was the most important apparatus of the Aero Club flying machines of the 1850s. So we have this bell-shaped thing that rotates around a central axis, and the insertion of some type of mysterious fluid is involved. And this is Delschow. Okay, this isn't Igor Wachowski or Nick Cook. In our times, this is Delschow writing this prior to 1923. He's essentially describing the bell as it's been described to us post World War II, and he's saying it was used for anti-gravity. So whereas you can question the popular story of the bell, I don't think you can question the rudimentary aspects of the bell. Somebody was using rotating devices. There's John W. Keeley, who also in the 1890s is reported and witnessed to be using rotation and spin, to counter gravity and stuff. So this basic idea of the bell, I think, was legitimate and very much a real thing. Now, what am I saying about what we can question about the modern legend of the bell? Just real quickly, here's the thing. Igor Kwiatkowski, the author of Wonder Weapons of Nazi Germany, he claims that a Polish intelligence officer came to him in the early 90s and told him about this Nazi bell thing. Okay. Sure. And the way he describes it physically, the way he describes what's associated with it, suspiciously matches what's in a late 80s book titled Lightning by Dean Koontz.
Okay.
The only differences are the Nazi bell, we're told, was a vertical device. And in Dean Koontz's book, it's horizontal, but it has to do with time travel in his novel. So the question is, we're told that this Polish intelligence officer found this in the files and revealed it to our world, to Igor Kwiatkowski. Okay, Kwiatkowski. But here's Dean Koontz, like 5 or 6 years before, essentially writing about the same thing. Okay, so how did Dean Koontz know about this? But then you go to Kecksburg, the Kecksburg UFO. And I'm in that camp that thinks this was not something from another world. This was an American sample or example of the German so-called Nazi bell technology that we were trying out for ourselves. I think that's what Kecksburg was all about. I mean, the acorn shape of the thing, right. The weird symbols around the edge. Delschow used these weird symbols, and there's just too much resonance with Delschow and what was going on with the Sonora Aero Club, and other things that we heard, little snippets during the war years. So, whereas we can question the modern popular details, okay, of the Nazi bell lore, we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. I argue that there's something to the bell story. Where do I think the Nazis got it? I think from NYMZA. I think the NYMZA guys, they had their archaeologists. They had their, a lot of you talked about how I identified a bunch of potential NYMZA suspects. I did that in Origin. And a lot of these German industrialists were also German occultists. And as occultists, they had an interest in ancient texts, right? And lost technology of the forgotten civilization. Yeah. So I argue that just like the Sonora Aero Club and Peter Menace of the 1850s, okay, I argue that Nazi Germany, their scientific industry, the guys behind their special technology, I argue that just like the Sonora Aero Club before them, 70 years prior before them, they got their technological hints from NYMZA. I think NYMZA, um, Menace learned certain things from NYMZA's knowledge of ancient lost technology and applied it to what they were doing in Sonora, California in the 1850s. And then whatever was learned through um, Peter Menace's Sonora Aero Club application, whatever NYMZA learned from that, and then whatever they continued to develop through the rest of the 19th century and into the early 20th century, they shared that. They passed that on to the scientists and engineers of Nazi Germany, said, here, try this, here, do this. And that's why we have the Nazi bell, okay? And we have the proof of concept rudimentary bell that Delschau says was being used in the 1850s. And I argue, and I lay out in previous books, that the airship mystery of the 1890s is your link, your that threads the bell, rudimentary bell from the 1850s Sonora Aero Club to Nazi Germany of the early 20th century. The 1890s airship mystery, when you dig into the details on that, they were using essentially just a more advanced version of what the Sonora Aero Club was experimenting with. Okay. And then I argue that, the Nazi bell is just an advanced version of what was being fooled with in the 1890s airship mystery. Although I do not think that the 1890s airship mystery here in the United States was a German effort. I do think it was American engineers, kind of an American version of NYMZA, if you will.
Yeah, it's a very interesting hidden history here. And you could, I guess, consider NYMZA a breakaway civilization in that respect.
Yeah, I like to call them breakaway societies. Civilization is too big of a word. I've quit using breakaway civilization. Yeah. I call them breakaway societies now.
Yeah, I think that's more appropriate. And you do bring up, we should touch on this briefly. You do bring up the problem of World War One, and why, if we have this advanced technology,
right? Where's the
NYMZA come on the side of Imperial Germany?
Yeah.
So could there be an explanation in the fact that you are dealing with a breakaway society, and one that's not?
And I am
so interested in our world.
I am working on trying to answer that question. Is okay.
Yeah.
Where were they during the World War years? And I'm kind of just exploring that in the work I do with a writer named Todd Wood. We in our Lost Future series. That there were these. I'm getting deeper into these mysterious groups that were dabbling in this lost technology stuff, and trying to explain the big hole in my hypothesis. If they were doing this right up to the 1890s, where the heck were they during the, it definitely where were they during World War One? But, we might have had hints of, that technology being played with in World War II, obviously, because you had the Nazi Foo Fighters and the other weird exotic technology that they were pursuing.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about today and what's going on now. How do you see the NYMZA influence on? I mean, I guess if we're talking about now, I guess we're talking about since 1963.
Yeah,
post 1963, and we did touch on this a little bit. But how do you see this influence that has influenced our, I guess, policy, our foreign policy, and our policy towards other countries? I mean, what are we dealing with here? And is the influence of NYMZA, is it coming to an end in the United States? In other words, are they moving to another? They're kind of a parasite, so they're moving to another host, I suppose.
I'm sure they've had their eyes on another host, early on in their time here, of course. I think instead of another nation, what they've done instead is moved on into the corporate world, the international business and banking world, just as you would expect, right? It's the international bankers, because they realize nations are too small for them. But right now, I have come to conclude that they've got our Congress in a grip. Okay. They effectively, they may not control every senator and representative, but they effectively control a majority of Congress, and they control our political process. And what it's about is empire. I'm not the first guy to say it, but essentially, you've got corporate imperialists. And, look at since 2001, right? Since 9/11. Look what we've done. We went to war with Iraq, and there were high-ranking military people, and there were other big thinkers and even just regular folk, who looked at that and said, "Wait a minute! If allegedly 9/11 was carried out by fanatics, Muslim fanatics." Who it was all planned in Afghanistan and such, and the Taliban supported them and blah, 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 so forth. Okay. I could see us, going after them in Afghanistan, but this Iraq thing, looks like just, W was getting revenge for, or finishing his daddy's job. What the heck? What was Iraq about? Well, and again, I'm not the first guy to say this, but, essentially, it was all about going into the 21st century, expanding the American empire through our military industrial complex, right? That's any regime that doesn't do what we want them to do has to be removed and toppled. Okay. Look at Gaddafi. Okay. During Reagan's time, he got the hell scared out of him, for involvement with terrorism and stuff. So he kind of backed off of that. But, you've seen the stories where Gaddafi was going to give all his people free healthcare, free energy, that kind of, he wasn't going to play along with what the American industrial empire, wanted done. So of course he had to go, and he was indeed eliminated. Look at, these people, they act like they want it to be the 1980s in a Cold War. Look how they are about Russia. Russia has not been the Soviet Union since their fall, okay, in the early 90s, okay? And they had their decade of the oligarchs were out of control, and then Putin finally, brought that under control. Russia is not a perfect place. I'm not saying, hey, everybody, let's go live in Russia. But they do not play. Putin does not play the imperialist game, so he is demonized. And this is what they've been doing. We're almost a quarter of the way through this century, and it continues with the military-industrial complex saber rattling, right? The Ukraine situation, provoked by and greatly created this, conflict by the CIA and, NATO, the NATO puppet, so to speak. It's all the conflicts. If you look closely, it's all questionable, because that's what it's about, is this imperialist, push. Keep having the wars so that the military industrial complex is booming and healthy. And that serves this international globalist philosophy to bring the world, bring the people of the world, not just under a government for socio-political, reasons, but for very much corporate ideology. Okay. Nations don't matter. The empire does. The industrial empire specifically. That's what matters, and that's what I see. We have been, for the most part, many of us unwittingly, many Americans, unwittingly serving for decades. Now, that might be, some people might say, wow, he's being vague. What the hell is he talking about? I'll give you an example from my perspective. I started work for the FBI in 1988. And then, of course, 93, moved over to the Air Force, got my commission, became a special agent of the Air Force OSI. And in my second assignment at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I was chief of a counterespionage operational branch. And I remember the day sitting at my desk. I'd been there 2 years. I was there for 3 years. It was my second year when it dawned on me, hey, wait a minute. Double agent operations, particularly military, these could be used for a classified technology exchange going on. In other words, what you do in that kind of operation is and this is in movies and books, people, so I'm not revealing the classified stuff is in the specifics of who and exactly what technology, but in a general sense, this is open source, okay, public knowledge. What you do in a double agent operation is you have somebody pretending to be angry at their own country or in desperate need of money. So they're going to betray their own country by going to a foreign intelligence service and offering to sell them classified information or technological schematics, whatever the case may be. Okay. So in order to make that believable, really what you do is that classic thing that narcissists do, where to make a lie believable, you have it sprinkled with a lot of truths, right? Well, you do this with this passage material that a double agent will give to the Foreign Intelligence Service. It's going to have actual classified documents of real, authentic technology, but with a little bit in there that's fake or old or something's wrong with it. It's not going to work. You know what I'm saying?
This is all over the UFO community. I mean, you see this all the time.
Yeah. If you give them, say, 10 files of classified technological information, it's conceivable that 9 of those files are going to be legitimately classified real technology that we're developing, right? And the idea is that the one file that's fake or skewed or something is going to skew it all. That's ostensibly what you're told. But I'm sitting there one day, young officer that I am, a captain, special agent, and chief of my branch, and I'm going, oh my God, what if the plan was to actually make sure the Russian Federation or what have you had this same level of technology. But they really didn't want to advertise they were doing this for whatever reason. Well, you could use DA ops, double agent ops. You could have agents like myself and the guys who work for me believing that we're putting the screws to the GRU. We're putting the screws to what they called the KGB after that. I think the FSR or something.
FSB.
Yeah. It changed a couple of times. We're putting the screws to them pesky Russians, right? With the Chinese or something. When actually, and even their agents think, oh boy, we're those agents up there, they think they're fooling us, but we're getting their stuff and we're going to figure it out. Well, on the agent level, on both sides, we think we're fighting the good fight. We think we're serving our countries gloriously and all that stuff, defending the homeland and stuff. When actually people above our pay grade would know what's really going on in this scenario. They're like, okay, the people in the know in Russia, okay, we're going to get this aerospace technology to them. We're going to pass this through one of Walter Bosley's people's ops, out of Wright Pat. And then when it gets delivered, they're going to play the game thinking that, they're being careful with OPSEC and thinking that their guy is in hazard and all this stuff when really nothing's going to happen to him because he doesn't even know he's passing stuff that somebody at the Pentagon is aware that's supposed to go to the Russians, right? And then when it gets over there, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, keep fighting the good fight, you agents. And when that dawned on me, I realized, wait a minute, if this is all BS, that I'm not really, if there's even a chance that I'm not really defending my country against an evil enemy, I don't want to be here. And it was, less than a year later, I was off working somewhere else, on another kind of mission. But I think back to that, and when I think of the stuff I wrote about in here and what I've since realized about about Operation Paperclip and our military-industrial complex, I realized, wait a minute, I didn't sign up and take an oath and accept a commission to serve a damned empire. Don't get me wrong. I like the idea that much of the world would like to be like us. I like that. I'm one of those who say what you want about it, but I like that Mickey Mouse and Coca-Cola are popular around the world. I like to see American culture be an influence.
Yeah.
I do not like forced empire.
Yeah, there's a difference between cultural empire, cultural influence, as opposed to like an actual militaristic type of empire.
Yeah, and the idea that
economic superiority type of empire.
Yeah, well, and using the hammer of their own political systems,
right.
And even to the point where we're going to take out a leader just because he's not playing, our version of ball. That's not what we're supposed to be about. And you know what? Yeah, call me naive. I don't think it's naive. It's principled. And
you talk about China as well. I mean, you talk about, how you bring up a good point about Russia, that you kind of echo some things that, I don't know if you ever heard of John Mearsheimer, but he kind of talks about this idea that we should be really talking to Russia and really unite against them, with them against China. But that's
right.
We've pushed them to the opposite direction.
We've dropped that ball presently. I've always felt that, and don't get me wrong. If there were, if Putin were sending his intelligence agents over here to steal our secrets and commit espionage on our soil and stuff like that, I'm all for hammering them. They're committing espionage.
They have.
And our friends have always done that. Israel and England, they've spied on us too. And what a lot of Americans don't understand is you can go to jail just as quick and just as long for giving unauthorized British or Israeli agents classified.
Right. And it has happened.
And it has happened.
Right.
Jonathan J. Pollard, may he spend the rest of his days in prison. I believe me, I'm all for counter espionage and stuff like that. But I was thinking from a strategic point when we get into it. At the time, it was looking even more so like we're eventually going to get into it with China, and we still might. We could really use Russia as an ally if that happens, because I know we'd have India on our side and, much of Southeast Asia. And if we had Russia and, of course, Japan, we would at least, have multiple war fronts that we could, be hitting them on or resisting, from. But when we push Russia away because of this heinous, evil lie that lies that they say about Putin, okay, and Russia, that's I wonder, who and what we're actually serving. And of course, it's the idea of, the NYMZA corporate idea. Nations no longer matter. It's industrial and financial alliances that matter.
Well, I will say about Ukraine is that because it is this proxy war, there's a lot of people making money off of the arms deals and shipments that we've sent over there.
Yep. Same old business as usual. And I know I catch hell from people
after 2 years. It's just pretty much is the same.
Yeah. I catch hell from people. Well, not so much now. Early on, it was my grandma lives over there, or my great grandfather was from there. And I'm like, okay, that's nice. You're not the problem. Your grandma and grandpa aren't the problem. The citizenry is not the problem. The problem is who's running their government, who's been in bed in illegal activities over there, who was, who embraced the Nazis literally during World War II and have continued to embrace Nazi principles. There's Azov Battalion. What was disgusting was they were, once this proxy war got started and was being pushed in our media starting a couple years back, some sources were even praising the Azov Battalion, but they have their origins in, Nazi association and collaboration. And in some cases, there's actual Nazi insignia still used
I've
by
seen that.
official
Yeah.
Ukrainian organizations and
Yeah.
agencies. So,
I don't,
my heart goes out to the civilians, who are suffering from this, but that does not mean this is a just war, and that does not mean the Ukraine is some wonderful place that needs to be saved by us.
I don't, I'm not a Putin fan. And I do think that he has his own type of imperial ambitions, but what I do feel is that this thing really, I mean, it's got to come to an end because it's really, um, I mean, any time I think it could turn, I mean, he threatens with all this nuclear talk, but so do we. And, it's like this is a big flashpoint.
Yeah.
And so, with the Ukraine war, I'm sorry, we're kind of getting off on a digression, but I mean, hey, it's been over 2 years. I mean, how do you think that ends over there, Walter? What's the solution there?
Um, it, well, see, there's multiple possibilities. So one thing it could be is that it just fizzles out, that NATO, the masters behind this NATO push, they find some way to save face, as it were. Okay, um, it just kind of fizzles out and goes away, or Russia essentially beats their ass in the conflict, and
Which is a real possibility now, I think.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, realistically, it's just a possibility.
Yeah, and if that happens, that's really look. The United States is, I think, more than any other time in our history, we're about to have the biggest amount of egg on our faces as we've ever had, and we might be cruising for the bruising, as they say. We might bite off more than we can chew and actually lose one, because you've got, for instance, BRICSA, okay, that industrial financial alliance between what, Russia, Brazil, I think China's, and
South America's and the South Africa's.
Yeah, what's going to happen is there's going to be more and more other entities that could gather and gang up on us, and you know we could have some type of major fall as a result of all this. It's scary right now. I mean, and to bring it back to what I talked about in here, look at members of our Congress that are just all rah rah and have been rah rah about this Ukrainian proxy war, for example. And just anything, if it supports or helps the military industrial complex to thrive, these controlled congressmen or these manipulated congressmen will vote for it. Any conflict that they believe is for all the high ground moral principles, World War II all over again, or the ones who have been bought out, or who got elected to begin with because of assistance from these lobbyists, these industrial empire lobbyists. And I go through and I list, as you recall, this is the one book. This is my most political book, you might say, because I identify members in Congress at the time of this writing who were on certain committees and are the ones who need to be careful of the influence, okay, or who may have already been bought. And I point out their policies and the things they push and believe in have been a part of, to try and make my point.
But you also talk about as well, and this I thought this was interesting that and I read this today as I was finishing out the book, and this is in the last chapter,
Hmm.
was you talk about how, even on the side of the Republicans,
Oh yeah.
you got this Project 2025,
Hmm.
ADF, which I had not heard of until today.
Yeah.
But this is something we talk a lot about on this show, Walter. We've talked a lot about this kind of like crazy right wing Christian fundamentalist stuff.
Oh
And
yeah.
a lot of people are really,
Scary stuff.
despite wherever you fall on Donald Trump or whatever,
Right. Yeah.
but one of the things that I'll tell people that, the reason I'm not too crazy about Trump is that because he has a lot of backing by, some real right wing, really quasi-fascist groups. And this Project 2025 is almost about as bad as you can get in that respect.
Right. Right. It's something to be concerned about. It's look in a
Yeah.
sentence or multiple clause sentence or whatever, maybe a small paragraph. Look, the roots to the modern American Christian fundamentalist, political movement and influence. This goes directly back to the puritanical influence in the colonial era. Okay,
Sure.
the Puritans
Yeah.
were the sticks in the mud. They were. We all know about the Puritans. They eventually pissed off everybody in England, and Europe said, "Oh heck no, you're not coming over here." So what did they do? They came over here to the colonies, to Massachusetts in particular. Well, they kind of eventually got absorbed into American Protestantism, which was specifically just bit off on this evangelistic philosophy, okay, which is a complete creation of I think medieval or Renaissance era or something like that. The whole idea of the rapture and the whole idea of you got to go out and evangelize and recruit.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is uniquely an American Protestantism product, and this is the background. This is the pedigree of people like the ADF. These are people who they're hardcore evangelistic. Everybody should live according to their philosophy and their mores. And I don't know about you, but I'm sorry, the United States, the idea of the USA is that as a whole, we're not living under any one particular church view. Okay. Now, folks, I am a conservative guy. Okay. So if, like you were suggesting,
I know
if I'm saying this stuff,
this is
think
what
about
surprised
that.
me a little bit when you said this. I know where you stand on some
What
things, and like that was like I was like, okay, I was like, yeah, you
this
really are
ADF,
hitting on something there.
ADF, Mike Johnson, who's the current Speaker of the House, that's who's in his background.
Yeah,
Okay,
right. He was a former attorney for them.
yeah, and this is an organization that wants to basically put us all under their evangelistic boot. And my thing is, I'm not a fan of churchianity. Okay, I believe in God. I have no problem with that. But churchianity, that's something that I don't respect and that I'm very wary of. And that is exactly what ADF and organizations, these hardcore evangelistic organizations are all about. Let's remember, I think most churches are a bunch of good folks who are getting together for their fellowship and worship and they want to do good things for their community. Don't for instance, I say that a lot of the best people that I've known all my life, and that Catholics are fine. I got no problem with Catholics. It's their leadership in Rome that I don't like. You know
Sure.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so anytime you get into any kind of religious fanaticism, yeah, you're looking like fascism, and that's what this ADF is, and that's what the guy who's now Speaker of the House, and he's also out there. He likes to rattle the saber against Putin and the usual suspects to just keep that military-industrial complex happy. He's one of them, and yeah,
Well, it seems like until recently, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily say that it was pro Putin, but definitely he was, blocking some of that Ukraine aid. And, if we're talking about just him, I mean, you talking about when you talk about some of these churchianity people
Yeah.
and these really right-wing evangelical people, they love
Mhm.
Putin. They love Russia.
You're right. Some of them do, because Putin is not a godless communist Marxist. Okay, Putin. A lot of people don't know about Putin is that he grew up in an Eastern Orthodox, you know, that was his family's past.
Yeah.
And what happened during the Bolshevik Revolution was the Marxists knew, the Bolsheviks knew, we are never going to crush the church. They were smart. They said, okay, we can't crush you guys. We know that even if we outlaw you, you're going to exist and you're going to be an underground and you're going to make our lives hell. So a deal was made. The Bolsheviks said, you can continue to exist, but you've got to give us access to your intel network. And believe me, they had one. All major churches have one. So the Orthodox Church said, okay, and you have to have a number of our people in your security services, which included the KGB.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now, when the wall fell, Putin, Colonel, I think he was a colonel, KGB colonel, he tendered his resignation like as immediately as he could. Okay. And and he's greatly under his leadership. He's brought back openly. They celebrate, Orthodox Christianity and the holidays, Christmas and Easter's, the big one and all of that. So yes, of course, our evangelist fundamentalists, of course, they see that and they're like, all right, yeah, that's not the way the Soviet Union used to be. My problem with them is where they are, they'll back up any conflict because America, all the complex has to do, all the bought congressmen have to do is say, oh, we're either protecting the homeland or we're helping, these poor folks who just want democracy like we have. And all they have to do is invoke that. And a lot of these people are just on board with, any conflict. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But it's not. Here's the problem I have with that particular group. It's not so much that, okay, they might have it right on some things, but this business of forcing their philosophy, wanting to force their philosophy on the whole country, I disagree with. I do not think is right. And that in its very nature is fascist. That's fascism. And golly, was there a fascist influence in the United States? Oh yeah. That's what Paul Winkler, that's what Joseph Farrell, that's what a lot of people talk about.
It almost seems like we're talking about these religious groups. I mean, it almost seems like coming full circle for something like NYMZA, right? Because they would have gone with the Teutonic Knights, which, I mean, there's certain of these
was ostensibly a church organization.
That would really idolize something like these Christian knighthood organizations.
Yeah. Well, think about it. That's a powerful influence, people's spiritual beliefs and religious beliefs. So if you can manipulate those people, you've got a major influence on society that you can wield, and get on your side. So of course they're going to ingratiate themselves with the fundamentalists and the evangelists, right? Of course they're going to, because it helps with their control and manipulation of the political body.
Well, Walter, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This has been a very interesting show, and it's very good to talk to you as always.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you found the book interesting. Like I said, it was it's one of my shortest books, but boy, was it tough for me to get through just because of the nature of the material in it. So, well,
where can people find the book, and what's coming out next?
Well, the book can be found at walterbosley.com, which is my fairly new website. It's just been up for less than a year, I think. So we're still, putting things up there and stuff, but it is active. If you go to the shop tab, walterbosley.com, you can find NYMZA. And we are having a NYMZA Con, more relative to the Charles Delshout Sonora Aero Club era than in my book, but NYMZA Con in Sonora, California, the second weekend of October. We'll be putting out more details soon enough and where you can buy tickets to the lectures and stuff. So we're working on that. And let me look back here. I'm finally wrapping up a couple of projects. So I'm going to be returning to the next book in my Secret Missions series. Some background research on that, and also the revised edition follow-up to my book on Disneyland, Latitude 33. Okay. But we just are in the middle of releasing. I'm excited about this because in the 21 years I've been a publisher, this is the first foreign language edition of any of my books. This is the Spanish language edition of Secret Missions 1, the one about Juan Cabrillo.
Oh, nice.
And I'm really excited about this, to see this. It's in Spanish. We're going to be doing Esoteric Napoleon in French and Spanish also. So this is like the most recent thing, really proud of. And as soon as that's available out there, the link, it'll probably be linked at walterbosley.com, but you'll also be able to get it at Amazon and barnesandnoble.com and all of that. So just to answer your question, publishing stuff, and the Empire of the Wheel TV development is picking up speed.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that as well.
Yep.
Esoteric Napoleon Part 2, was working on that?
That's coming a little bit slower because I'm restructuring how I present that material. But it will be in the hopper eventually. The next Secret Missions volume, it's going to be about an individual that has popped up in previous books of mine that I've been fascinated with, and finally it's time for me to jump in and do a book on him. Who I won't identify him yet, but it's a very interesting story. So I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, just trying to keep myself busy with all sorts of stuff.
Gotcha. All right. Well, guys, we are keeping ourselves busy as well with the show and with planning for Strange Realities Conference coming up November 1st through the 3rd. And hopefully by the time this is out, we'll have tickets available for you guys to buy. But there's also our Patreon as well. If you want to throw us some support, you can find that at patreon.com/Conspirinormal. And next week we're going to have Kendall Lackey on. So come join us then. And thank you, Walter, for coming on.
Oh, thank you. And I want to remind everybody, of course, that on Wednesdays and Saturdays at the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube, I do live streamings. So check me out there.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. All right.
Thanks, Adam.
And we'll talk to you later on Conspirinormal.